I'm Carl King, and this is the Carl King Podcast, where we learn about music, filmmaking, and the other creative arts. To support this podcast, head over to patreon.com/Carl King and join for just $1 or $5 per month. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. Special thank you to my Illusionist $51 level patrons, both Hank Howard III and Chua Bade. Quick shout out to my music endorsements, Vienna Symphonic Library, Fractal Audio, Ernie Ball Strings, Toontrack, and Millennia Media. Now let's get this episode beginned. I have 4 Carl King the Human updates today. Number 1, for my very good friends of Carl King, I have deleted my Twitter account because it was putting me in a bad mood. And I believe the best thing I can do to make the world better is keep making good things. So if you're looking for me, you won't find me over there anymore. As always, the best places to find me are my website, this podcast, and behind the Whole Foods dumpster. Number 2, speaking of my website, this past weekend I attended DesignerCon 2022 in Anaheim, California, and I posted a gallery of nearly 100 photos on my blog. I visited so many talented artists and creators, including Strange Cat Toys, The Monstores, Matt Ryan, Kelly Toki, Los Focos, Deercat, Alex Pardee. It was overwhelming. So head over to carlkingdom.com/blog and give those photos a looking. And number 3, my desire to make some new Carl King music is growing. Each day, I'm over here in Plosive Central, and I see my PRS guitar and my Rickenbacker just sitting there, and I want to make sounds with them. I think it's almost time for a new Carl King album, but who knows how long that will take and how I will ever have the time. And number 4, that brings me to today's episode. It is going to be shorter than usual. I'm going to talk about just one film and one song, and here's why. I am spending the majority of my own creative time each week making this show instead of making my own music and films. For instance, my new animated pilot, Dragon Tooth Inn, has been waiting on me for weeks, and I am making no progress on it. All of the voice acting is finished, and all I need to do is score it, add sound effects, and turn it over to Lance Myers for animation. So in order to keep things in balance, I'm going to continue making the podcast, but try to scale back the length. I think it would be ideal if I could record at least a couple of songs per month, one for Patreon members only, and one for public release. So we will find out how this adjustment of my energy allocation works. And with that, or with nothing, let's get into this week's filmmaking lesson. The filmmaking lesson this week is Pearl from 2022, directed by Ty West and starring Mia Goth. This story is a prequel to the other Ty West Mia Goth film called X, which I covered in episode 35. It rewinds the clock about 60 years, so it's set in 1918 during the influenza pandemic, and coincidentally, it was filmed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Folks, I usually watch movies on my TV in the living room, but I watched this one on my iMac and was caught off guard by the super wide aspect ratio. And that aspect ratio is 2.39 by 1. Now maybe I'm just not used to seeing video files that shape. I think having the letterboxing, those black bars at the top and bottom of the TV, helps me to overlook that squashed, elongated shape, which is nearly 2.5 times wide as it is tall. For reference, 1.78 to 1 is your usual look. Your typical TV show or movie or whatever you'd shoot with a video camera, also known as 16 by 9. Well, okay then. I will let everyone know. Pearl has a similar opening shot that we saw in the other movie, X, and that's the shot of the farmhouse from inside the barn. I got a kick out of the opening title design, which was over-the-top stylized like Gone with the Wind or Wizard of Oz. And both of those movies are from 1939 for some reason. Why? We don't know that yet. I read an interview with the director, Ty West, and he said that the opening shots of a film teach the viewer how to watch it. And I think it tells us what genre or creative language to think in and what to expect. This film has a quote-unquote Technicolor look, or at least a nod to those old, highly saturated films. Some interesting trivia is he originally wanted to shoot this in black and white in order to save money, but A24 told him to go for it and make it full color. Now, in that opening scene, we have the main character Pearl, played by Mia Goth. And she's playing dress-up in her bedroom mirror. Then unexpectedly, the lights shut off with a loud series of ka-chunk sound effects, like huge stage switches being thrown. Because the next thing you know, the lights kick back on, and she is on an imaginary stage with a spotlight on her. And this also communicates right up front, this movie is going to have a hallucinogenic tone. We now know how powerful her imagination is, as well as what she most desires. Just as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, the orchestral score by Tyler Bates and Tim Williams tells us a lot. It's actually very John Williams, and I love those woodwinds. There's plenty of bass clarinet, which is my favorite orchestral instrument, and the music is prominent and sounds like a 30s or 40s movie in an on-the-nose, jokey kind of way. The filmmakers used a contrast of beautiful and ugly in every element of this film. The visuals, the sound, the actors, the writing. There are horrific bloody scenes juxtaposed with beautiful blue skies and light-hearted theater, music, dance routines. And psychologically, there is some generational trauma going on here. The mother is going through a living hell, so she makes sure her daughter goes through it too. And as Pearl says, quote, "I'm special. Mama's gonna feel real stupid when she finds out, won't she?" Unquote. Ty West, or now I'm thinking, is it T West? We don't know yet. Anyway, he captures Pearl's desperation, the homicidal narcissism, the need to prove her worth to the world, and to, at all costs, escape that farm. She says, quote, "I want to be loved by as many people as possible to make up for all my time spent suffering. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and fear washes over me, because what if this is it? What if this is right where I belong? I'm a failure." Unquote. Now, why can't we have Star Wars movies this well written and dramatic? And that made me consider, what if Luke Skywalker trying to get off the farm was a total delusion? Like, at the end of Return of the Jedi, what if it cut back to Luke still staring at that binary sunset? And it was all the daydream of a loser. But this film is more like, what if Star Wars went totally wrong? What if we show what being stuck on a farm in a depressive life will do to someone if they don't escape? There's a brilliant confessional scene where Pearl's friend asks, "What else have you done, Pearl?" And Pearl gives a 5.5-minute continuous close-up monologue. And you don't see this sort of focus on acting in a Marvel movie, do you? They would never do a 5.5-minute shot like that dedicated to a character's psychology. And they finally cut away to the friend that she confessed to. And after about 20 seconds of uncomfortable fumbling, the blonde girl finally says, "I should probably get going now." Now, this film is over the top and self-conscious. And most of all, the end credits. Wow. By the way, those were very John Schnepp. I recommend that everyone go and check out the Metalocalypse episode called Death Water and watch those end credits. Aha! Does anyone see a similarity there? Now, I have to wonder if this series of movies is the greatest thing that Mia Goth will ever make, because I don't know how she could top them. So here's what I consider the filmmaking lesson or takeaway. In music, there is a technique called theme and variation, where you come up with a musical idea and then you create many versions of it. You explore it, you try it this way, you try it that way, you see how far you can twist it. Well, this trilogy is, at least so far, very much that, but in film form. However, Pearl takes this idea of theme and variation to a whole new level by casting the same lead actor, Mia Goth, but as different characters in different eras of the same storyline. Now, here's a crazy cool thing. Remember the actor named Brent Spiner? You might remember him as Lieutenant Commander Data. Well, I seem to recall him suggesting doing that exact thing with the Next Generation cast. Meaning, use that same ensemble of actors from the Star Trek crew to make other shows or movies. Like imagine the crew of the Enterprise all in a totally different movie together, like a fantasy adventure or an indie comedy. Why not? I have to say that Pearl is one of my favorite films of the year, so I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, plus a little heart on Letterboxd. And now let's get into this week's song analysis. This week we have a song called Dirty Boy by Cardiacs from the album Sing to God from 1995, and this was submitted by Ryan Mellinson. Now, this is a difficult one, but not because it's a difficult piece of music. It would just be so much easier if I played clips of the actual music, but I want to avoid any copyrighted content. Either way, I intend to do my best, and if you listen to the song at least once, I think you'll be able to follow along. Now, to work this piece of music out, I loaded the original audio of the song into my DAW, Cubase, and mapped out the first 2.5 minutes. Because this sucker is almost 9 minutes long. I'll actually post a screenshot of my Cubase screen so you can see what I did, but I'm not going to share the audio. And I won't cover the rest of the song in detail, but that's okay because everything I say here applies to the song as a whole. And what I will do now is analyze the composition from a conceptual standpoint and explain how it works in the world of music theory. So if you wanted to write your very own Cardiac song, I am kinda going to give you the basic recipe. And for those who don't know much about the band Cardiacs, don't worry, because I don't either. People have recommended them to me for years, and I've listened to a song here and there, but I couldn't tell you one autobiographical thing about them. Some people have suggested I must be a fan of them because somehow my music sounds similar, and that is an observant guess. And here's why. The core essential thing that distinguishes Cardiacs from other music? Well, they modulate constantly. Well, you might be wondering, now what the heck is modulating? Well, let's get into some basic music theory. You've probably heard of a song being in a key. For instance, the key of C major, which is a good choice of key. So in each key, such as C major, there are, let's say, 7 notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And they repeat. And with those 7 notes, we put them together to create, let's say, 7 different chords that are in the key. And that's what you get to choose from when you are in a key. 7 notes, 7 chords. Now, that's a loose, general way of looking at it for Western diatonic sort of classical music. Basic stuff. And a lot of pop music doesn't really deviate a whole lot from that. In fact, it's usually 2 chords, the first and the fifth, or 3 chords, which is the first, fourth, and fifth, or 4 chords, the first, sixth, fourth, and fifth in this order. Over and over. So you can make unlimited songs out of that. Now, a piece of music might change the key part of the way through. The songwriter or composer might modulate. So the song might be mostly in C major like this, but then modulate to a related key like A minor or F major for a while, and then modulate back to the key of C. It's not all that unusual, and it's a little bit hard to explain without playing through a whole song, but those are the basics of keys and key changes. Now, what cardiacs, and I, do is rapidly and frequently change keys, all over the place, as often as every single chord. So instead of this, you end up with something like this. And so on. Now, in a way, you could say that this song, Dirty Boy, has no key. Or you could say it has many, many, many keys. Maybe as many keys in the song as there are chords in the song. But what holds all those random chords together are a melody, so that it feels like they're kind of supposed to happen. Here's that previous example with a melody gluing it together. Now, when writing in this style of constant modulation, I like to think of each chord as the key. If you play an F chord, you are in the key of F. B minor chord, you are in the key of B minor. And you can go a step further and do what Alexandre Desplat, the film composer, does. Instead of thinking of every F major chord as a modulation to F major, you could instead use modes. And I'm not going to get into explaining modes, but you can think of them as little flavoring variations of scales. They're much like a major or minor scale, with a note or two raised or lowered. So you could treat an F major chord as being the key of F Lydian, or F Mixolydian, and modulate into that key for just a single chord. A B minor chord can be thought of as B Phrygian or B Dorian. Now, I do this constant modulation stuff all over in my music, and in my opinion, it can create a magical, otherworldly sound. But it can also create a lot of tension and confusion. And unless you're writing sci-fi movie scores, people might wonder why it sounds like that. So back to Dirty Boy. The majority of the chords in this song are simple major chords, with a few unexpected minor chords too. And I found only a few chords that sounded like they were inversions, meaning that the bass voice, in this case the bass guitar, was playing a chord note other than the root of the chord. And if you don't know what that means, just know it's another way of keeping the chords easy and straightforward. Because if the bassist did play a lot of inversions, it would weaken the strength of those dramatic chord changes. And using such simple chords avoids the vertical murkiness that jazz chords will create, because it's all fairly consonant chords from moment to moment. Instead, the dissonance is created horizontally in time. But here's what makes the song sound so complex and clever. You can't predict where those seemingly simple chords are going next. The leaps from simple chord to simple chord are what trick your ear. And here's the other thing that's happening in this song. Cardiacs write in very long phrases. Now, typically, music is written in easy-to-manage phrases that are a measure or 4 measures long. Take Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, for example. 4 beats long. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that's 1 measure in 4/4. If you put the whole Twinkle Twinkle Little Star song together, you have a neat little tune that's like 6 measures long. It's uniform, and even though the melody might change slightly, it's the same little idea repeated over and over. Easy. But on Dirty Boy, Cardiacs write extremely long phrases that feel like they go on forever. You're not quite sure where it begins or ends. For instance, when the singing begins at bar 12, it takes until bar 38 before the song returns to the re-intro to get ready for what might be verse 2. So that's 26 bars before they use the same chords again. It's a musical phrase that is about 90 seconds long. So if you think of a melody or phrase as a sentence, this would be a sentence that takes up an entire paragraph, or even a full page in a book, and compare that to the simple phrase, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And when I was measuring this out in Cubase, I broke those 26 bars down into 4 chunks of 11 bars, 3 bars, 5 bars, and then 7 bars, because that's where I detected sort of conceptual units or these major shifts in theme, or more like little miniature themes that felt like they kind of belonged together. Now, within that, on a measure-to-measure level, it could be counted out in a couple of different obvious ways. Number 1 would be shifting between 4/4 and 6/4 time signatures. Or the other option would be mostly 4/4 with occasional bars of 2/4. But I would opt for switching between 4/4 and 6/4 to accommodate the unusual phrases, because many of them actually felt like 6 beats that belong together. And here's something else to think about. This isn't music that's hard to play, but it is hard to remember. It's actually physically no different from playing a Nirvana song on any of the instruments. And this relates to my belief that what we might consider good musicianship might simply be a strong ability to memorize music. I might actually be considered a bad musician simply because my overall ability to memorize things is bad. Now, I'm just going to guess that the music for this song was written to fit the abstract lyrics, which also seem to have no obvious rhythmic form. Maybe the lyrics were written out freeform, as a big poetic cloud, and later put to music. So if you're trying to write music with this sort of single, extremely long phrase, like Cardiacs did, starting with non-metric lyrics is a good way to do it, or at least lyrics that don't suggest a typical rhyme scheme and song meter. So there's your Cardiacs formula. Lots of simple root position chords, constant modulation, and long as heck phrases. And then again, maybe this is the only Cardiacs song that does this. We don't know yet. Anyway, I enjoyed analyzing this song, and thank you to Ryan Melanson, or Ryan Melanson, for sending it my way. Okay, that's the end of this episode of the Carl King Podcast. Remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, or anywhere else you listen to these dang podcasts. And support the creation of more episodes by joining my Patreon for $1 or $5 per month. That's patreon.com/Carl King. Or send a tip through PayPal or Venmo to username Carl Kingdom. And as always, special thanks to my $51 a month patrons at the Special Illusionist level, Chubode, and Hank Howard III. And thank you to all of the very good friends of Carl King for listening. And as I always say, okay then, I will let everyone know.